'Cause tiny home, it grew so large, the tree, the ground did smoke. Tiny faith, a tree of life, something I doubt couldn't shake. Will it take?
Welcome again to the podcast for Without Spot or Blemish Ministry. We were talking to Chris in part one, that's a pseudonym, about his experience with a narcissist Jezebel that he married and spent 2 decades of marriage with. And we're getting up to the point where he's about to get married, and we're going to take up there. So, Chris, you were telling us in the last episode that she literally had love bombed you so much and idealized you so much that everything she told you was truth, and the warnings that the people around her in her home state were giving you, they were like water off a duck's back with you, because how could these things be true about her? These people are so wrong and so evil, and they weren't Christian and she was, and they must be lying about her. But now you look back and think, man, those were some pretty big red flags that I could have paid attention to had I known.
Absolutely. And I think what happens is she was so convincing, and then didn't even allow me really time to think about things through, like statements that were made, because she would cover everything up with the flattery of her mouth and the deception of her lips. And when I look back, obviously, and when you're young, you make a lot of decisions without discretion. And because, relationships in my background, my parents didn't have the best of marriage. And so she let me know that she was going to have a great marriage, and it was going to be all centered around Jesus Christ. And so that's
just what you wanted to hear.
Oh, this is what people need to understand. Every single thing I wanted to hear, she was there feeding me it. The information. She was there feeding me everything that I could possibly want and ask. And matter of fact, even more, I thought I never would have expected this kind of level of a person to be, that much into what I was into. And so I think that's what people need to understand, that the mirroring or projecting my values onto herself. But then she was amplifying it and making it look even greater and bigger than I could ever even dream or ask for.
So did this lead you into a jewelry store?
Okay, what happened was I wore what I called my own purity ring. I wore my deceased uncle's wedding ring. I would wear that at my work just because I did not want women hitting on me. And it was something that I would wear on my ring finger. So I was wearing it at the time. And as the 10 days that I was there was starting to wind down, she was really trying to groom me for the final decision, which was to get married. I had seen enough red flags in her during that time that the Holy Spirit showed me very clearly that she was not the person that I was supposed to marry. I was confident of the decision. I watched her interact around other guys, and even her so-called rapist, which she ended up marrying, and had a few months of marriage with. I watched.
Was she older than you?
No, she's 2 years younger than I am. But she played the victim so well, played that whole thing that, she needed delivered from the evils of all of these people. And so she kept putting these little things about needing delivered from, needing distance from these people, needing somebody that would love her son and love her and to teach her the Bible and to allow her to go for her calling, which was missions, and to be in the ministry. She said everything right. But in the meantime, I did see the red flags. At 21 years old, I seen very clearly the Holy Spirit would bring things to my attention. It wasn't like I was completely blinded and completely in a fog. I will have to admit that I seen things that I was
What were those things?
Well, number one, a lot of it was her interaction with other guys. And then I noticed that when we were around other conversations with friends of hers or family that began to talk about situations or things that she had done or did, and she would quickly change the subject very, very quickly. She would always minimize what she had done, or she would laugh or after those conversations would happen, she would pull me off to the side or pull me into another room, and she would tell me that they had a very distorted view of what really happened. And so I was not getting a same story between her family and her. There's just so many inconsistencies that I see.
She sounds like she was super clever at, as soon as there was a little smoke of her being uncovered or a little bit of flame, she brought some retardant and put the fire out as quickly as possible. She'd pull you aside. She'd make sure the story wasn't really completed, that you couldn't hear everything. She just was an expert at deflecting stories about her that would bring to light her dark deeds.
That is correct. And also, each time anything that would happen that would make me question, she would get more seductive with me. She would do a little more things that would make me drawn to her sexually. She kept a barrier between us, but she would just give me enough to make me want her more and more.
Just being a tease, really.
A complete tease.
So tell me about her behavior you mentioned with other men while you were there. What was that like?
Well, I noticed that she crossed boundaries with guys real quickly. She was a very flirtatious in manner with a lot of things. And this so-called rapist, when we were around him, she was even flirty and nothing like what I would have ever to a guy that the reason why they broke off their marriage was she said that she came home one day and he was in bed with her best friend and another girl at the same time. And so I was trying to find out why you would be that kind and that flirty and even touchy with him around me.
Right there in front of you.
Right in front of me, which is interesting because it started creating a jealousy within inside of me.
Mm-hmm. And an insecurity. And that's one way that that's one way they begin to cause panic attacks in people, is through that kind of crossing lines and barriers that make you intrinsically and at the spiritual level feel that this isn't safe.
I felt very unsafe around her. But then what was interesting is that she would love bomb me twice as hard, which would put me in a fog, if you will.
Right.
And she was trying to tell me that at the same time that, a lot of these things she didn't want to do or didn't want to be, she needed someone to take the Bible and to show her, and she wanted to escape all of this life.
Mm-hmm. She's showing some flaws, but all of us have flaws. We can pray through this because of her passion for the Lord. We can get set free of this.
That is correct. I would tend to think that, hey, this is someone who has a passion for Jesus Christ, who the devil, I started believing this, that the devil was trying to destroy her. So then I became, as I had 3 sisters, I became like as a protection to her. I became someone that was trying to deliver her from this mindset. And I thought that I was going to help this person who had such a fire for Jesus Christ, if I just got her out of that environment. And that's what she kept alluding to, is if I just got her out of that environment, then she would be able to serve Jesus Christ. In reality, in retrospect, looking back, she should have been serving Jesus Christ then and there. There's nothing that I could have done if that's not inside of her.
Right. Man, that's such a huge revelation. I've been in the same position in my 30s and early 40s before I learned about all this. So, and you at 21, it's easy to be caught up in that web. So I asked you about if you went to the jewelry store, did you buy her a ring, or how did you guys get engaged?
Okay. So I was determined on the last 2 days, I couldn't wait to leave. I was done with her. Because I was like, there ain't no way in the world. All the stuff that I was like extremely attracted to physically, I was extremely attracted to the way that she treated me around people, the way that she would put me up in front of everybody. I mean, I was the Billy Graham that had came in and, that I was this man that was going to change the world with the gospel. She introduced me that way to everybody. And so there was that complete division in me that I've never felt that way. Somebody never made me feel so good about myself. But yet I had all these red flags that I believe the Holy Spirit had very clearly given me. And so then the last day, I was irritated. I could not wait to get out of there. But then she had treated me with this great dinner. She did all of these things. She rented a limo. She got 24 roses in this limo. She played some music and everything. And she, inside the limo, she did everything to the point where it made me feel that I was required to ask her to marry me. Right when I was on my way to the airport, I took off the ring off my own finger, or that my grandmother had given me from my uncle, his wedding ring, and I had placed it on her finger in the delusion of my that moment and that experience. I asked her to marry me. I know I sound like an absolute idiot and a fool, but I was so overwhelmed with the hundreds and hundreds of dollars that she spent on me that I felt obligated.
No. I think everyone listening's been where you are, maybe not to that level. I mean, to lay a trap, you think about the woman in Proverbs that decked her bed with tapestries and perfumes and all of that. I mean, that's basically what she did to you. I mean, this was an all-out assault. I mean, shock and awe. She went for it, man. I've never heard a story like this.
You know, looking back, I feel like an absolute fool, but I was so ready to get out of there. Before I was on the airplane to leave back to my own home, it was such a love bombing that I seriously felt completely obligated to ask her to marry me.
Man, you got Hiroshima. That was like a nuclear bomb, an atom bomb.
She had obviously planned this whole entire thing, spent hours of planning this event before I went back to the airport and left. It put me to a point that I thought, you know what? Even after I gave her that ring and got on the airplane, I thought, you know what? I don't care if I lose that ring, and I never end up marrying her, because I was so divided in my mind at that time.
How did she react to you asking her to marry you?
What she did was she actually said, I know what you're wanting to do, and I'm going to tell you yes.
Wow. So she completely manipulated it.
To the point that I look back and I laugh, because the whole thing was set up for the very purpose for me to deliver her from her current circumstances. I was one of the nice guys. I was a nice guy, and I was a very naive guy. And the word obligated, I can't even tell you. And because she had done enough sexual things with me that I felt completely obligated to her to marry her.
Mm-hmm. Wow, dear listener, I know that you may be hearing Chris's testimony and thinking, oh, man, been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Wow, that's just, wow. That's the pay dirt right there. And so once you were obligated, you got on the plane and you thought, okay, I'm going thousands of miles away from her right now back to my home state. This doesn't necessarily have to happen. How was it that the deal was ultimately closed?
Well, back to the limo, she kept tapping on my ring with her fingernail, letting me know that I can give her that ring as a promise. She did everything to indicate, because, I don't have anything to offer her. I didn't have a ring. I didn't have any kind of stuff like that. Well, immediately when I got back to the house, she wanted me to call her. And
Can I interject something about that ring and her tapping on it?
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of symbolic of her tapping on your purity and asking you to give her your purity. Because that was a purity ring that, in your sight.
That is correct, and I can definitely see that looking hindsight. When I went back, she told me immediately that she had told her whole family and everything that she was going to be getting married, and so the more entrenched she just kept telling everybody that she was. She picked out a church and everything immediately that I could get married to her there in where she lived. And so then the more strings that were attached to me, the more obligated I felt to fulfill that.
It's like the Black Widow spider, just making more of the strands of the web, just strand after strand tied to you. You were trapped further and further in it. She's almost like putting you in a ball of it.
Correct. And she, within a week, she had sent she had got my information to my family, that where their addresses. She sent them gifts. She gave them packages, and she told them that she couldn't wait to be my parents' daughter-in-law.
Wow.
So she contacted my sister and had phone conversations that she always wanted a sister-in-law, because she only had a brother, so she never had a sister. So she began to interweave right into my family immediately, to the point where it was like there was no turning back.
Wow. She not only got you in the web, she was tying you further into the web by using other members of your family.
Correct.
Wow. Man, this is an amazing testimony. So then once that happened, you felt there was no turning back, and maybe it's the will of God. Were you even thinking that?
Oh, sure, because I thought once I accepted, I had already asked her to marry me because I was a person of my word. I felt, again, I keep using the word obligated. I felt obligated to keep my word.
Yeah, your word was your vow almost.
Correct.
Even though you hadn't made the vows of marriage yet, you felt that you had given your word. Did your whole family go to her state for the wedding?
No. Matter of fact, my family had already seen all of the red flags. They kept saying to me, don't you think this is moving too fast? Don't you think, I've never seen anybody fall in love with somebody so quickly that I'm not sure that this is a right move on your part.
Wow. So even though she was trying to tie you further to her through them, they were cautioning you. They kind of saw the red flags themselves.
Correct. And even my pastor wanted me to have a time where I would do some kind of counseling. She discouraged that. Matter of fact, I had appointments set up, and then she created a crisis that I could not go to because I had to be on the phone with her.
Gosh, this Narc Jez, every button. I started this podcast series with you off on. We've got an expert level Narc Jez. We've got the top of the line Mercedes model. I mean, holy cow. She's doing every single part of the script and more. So when you did fly off to go to her home state to marry, was your family, what did they say to you as you were flying away? Well, God bless you, but we still think this is not the right thing, or?
Yes, that is correct. My parents dropped me off at the airport. They told me just because I go fly out there and I get out there doesn't mean I have to marry.
Wow.
So they were giving me all the indications. You are making a decision and you're an adult and you can make this decision. However, we do not believe that this is the will of God for your life. In the meantime, she kept asking me what my family had thought. She knows how to cover every base that she would say, of course, that they're going to say that because this is what the devil wants. If we're supposed to be married, he's going to go from every angle to try to stop you from doing this.
The thing about her was she was able to spiritualize everything in a reversed, upside down position. And it's just the cleverness of it with someone that wants to do right by God to present that to you in that way. It's beyond the pale.
Well, in the meantime, she had memorized Bible verses and done all kinds of things to keep convincing me that this was the will of God for our lives. And
she was like Satan using the word of God against Jesus after his 40 days of fasting.
Correct. Our wedding invitations, she had taken pictures of me, and unbeknownst to me, she had done what we called a fairy tale wedding. She had put herself in a princess, and I was a prince, and she had somebody that knew her cousin's husband had taken these wedding invitations and made it a fairy tale wedding. Like I came from a faraway land to meet her, and we're going to ride off on a white horse, which is exactly what we did. We rented a horse to ride off. So everything looked like a prince and a princess and a damsel in distress. I'm serious.
You literally rode off on a white horse? Is that what you literally?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, from the limo and the flowers to the white horse, I mean, good grief, she knew what she was doing. She could sell snow to an Eskimo.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that's true. And here's the thing: is in all of that, people that didn't like it were like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Like, I've never seen anybody so in love with someone. So even the people that were around me that had warned me were also like, wow, this is pretty impressive.
She had everybody spellbound.
Oh, completely.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, that's Jezebel, isn't it? She seduces servants of God to fornication. She's seductive, and she's able to beautify things and put the sparkles and to bedazzle everything enough to make even her harshest opponents look at her in awe. I'm reminded of this scripture in Revelation where John says he looked at the woman on the beast, the whore of Babylon, and he said that he was in awe of her. And the angel that was with him had to correct him because he just looked at her in awe of this woman that had killed the saints. And you think about Jezebel killed the prophets, but the devil himself comes as an angel of light. And he doesn't come ugly. He comes beautiful. Okay, Chris, so you married her and you brought her back you went on a honeymoon and you brought her back to your home state. And then you were living together. What was that like initially?
Well, initially, first couple weeks was very good. Because everywhere I go, she really lifted me up to be a great man of God. And she would go out of her way to the point of embarrassment because I'm one of those guys that I'd rather, stay in the background if I can. I don't like flattery and I don't like those kind of things. I think what people have to realize that I just wanted to interject this one Bible verse of Matthew 24:24 that talks about the false messiahs and false prophets. When they appear, they'll perform great signs and wonders to deceive. And here's what it says there in Matthew chapter 24: if possible, that it would deceive the very elect. I think that what people need to understand that as much as I want to beat myself up later on, and even now, sometimes I'm reminded that if it were possible during the times of the Antichrist and so forth, that the very elect would believe him, and because they're so good at this, they know.
You're not alone though. I've been in the same boat almost to an exact degree, and almost all of the listeners have too. So.
Okay.
Please, I think everybody understands. You at an expert level, and it's surprising if you weren't. But the amazing thing is the redemption that God has you on now, which we will get to, and how He's used you and is using you and is going to continue to use you and to do amazing, miraculous things through your ministry. But suffice to say that your story is going to be well received by the listeners of this ministry, because we've all been there, done that, and have the T-shirt.
The first couple of weeks after we got married, everything was good. It wasn't but a month and a half, I started seeing this flirtatious spirit come back out among other guys. And I noticed it. My sister, who happened to live in the same apartment complex we were living in, when I would go to work, she would see her down at the pool talking to guys. She said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't think it's innocent conversations that she's having. I began to ask her about these, and of course she, walked around it. There was one day a guy came up to my apartment. I didn't know. He walked right through my front door to embrace her. I was supposed to be at work that day, and he just opened the door and went right through my apartment complex and had his hands to embrace her. And he
no way.
Oh yeah, he didn't see me until he was almost to the point of contact with her. And when he seen me, the fear of God went through his eyes. I chased him down the 3 flights of stairs. If I would have gotten a hold of him, but then I went back up and I said, what in the world was that about? I mean, how can a guy automatically think he can walk through our door and embrace you? What's going on? I knew I was being, I guess, gaslighted or something immediately.
But what did she say, though? How did she respond?
She's like, I've never seen him before. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he thought it was somebody else. And she just began to
what a lie.
Tell me the story. So and then a few days later, I caught her talking to her ex-husband on the phone. She thought I was asleep, and she's crying, and it was a intimate conversation. And I stood behind her, and I walked over there, and I hung up the receiver, And I said, no, the answer is no, this will never happen. You're married to me, not to him. You said that he was a guy that raped you. I'm a little confused at the conversation you just had. And so immediately I said, we got to think about some things here and I told her at that moment in time after a lengthy argument that I was going to send her back to her state with a one-way ticket. I was done with the marriage. I told her immediately, I'm done with the marriage. You can't keep deceiving me. Something is going on. That she went so out of her way to go around the stories and everything to cover up herself, and she love bombed me, many times more. That she said, let's look for another apartment complex, because if people are doing this, and from now on, you only will have a conversation with him. I swear to you, I will never have a conversation with my ex ever again. And so she made everything right, but I took 2 days away from her thinking I was going to divorce her at that point in time. That was just a month and a half into our marriage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
do you think that while you were engaged and you left to go back home, that did she spend more time with her ex that had supposedly raped her then too?
Well, I called her cousin, the husband, and then he told me that they were sexually involved during our engagement.
Wow.
And so I confronted her, and she denied, and had every good story to get me to believe that she was telling the truth. And
in retrospect, do you think that she slept with the guy that walked through your door?
Definitely she had seduced him. There's no doubt about it, because I described the guy to my sister. My sister said that's exactly the guy that she's been talking to day in and day out at the pool.
For me, if he walked through that door to embrace her, that means he had been through that door and embraced her before.
That is
correct. The presupposition is they had been together before for him to so comfortably do that again.
That's exactly what went through my mind. But then she told me, she began to play the Bible thing again, that, I couldn't divorce her because she had not had engaged herself sexually at all, that maybe she had some indiscretions in speaking to people because she was just trying to tell him about Jesus Christ. She was witnessing to him, and that was her story.
She used her missionary status to get away with bloody murder, it seems. So did as your marriage went on, did more of these indiscretions occur?
Well, I became a youth pastor, and we moved to another city that was over an hour away. And, there was a lot of smoke in different areas with different men, that the pastor had come to me and said that some people did not feel comfortable with her and felt that she crossed lines. Well, I hadn't seen any of them. And so when I went to her about that, she played the victim. I defended, and then it ended up being like, me and the pastor being, at odds with each other, because I thought he was attacking her. And I kept thinking, well, everybody's just jealous of her beauty. And that's what she kept saying everywhere she goes, that people are just jealous, and people would rise up and try to accuse her of things. And so from there on out, through several years of going to different ministries, these things would arise, but I would come to her defense and end up resigning the ministry, because
instead of building up your ministry, she ended up destroying it everywhere you went.
Every single place. Matter of fact, to the pastor at each final conclusion, they would say that having a wife like yours, you will never end up in, or you will never be successful with ministry. Well, every time they would say that, because of the deceptions of the enemy, there was part of me that would be like, wait a minute here, maybe there's some truth in that. But then on the second side of that, I just thought that was the way that she would play it. That was the enemy trying to destroy the ministry that we were doing, because in that particular ministry, we added about 50-some people to the church within a year, and I baptized 40-some people, and there was a lot of success happening. There was a lot of people getting saved and things. So I thought those were all tactics of the enemy to try to destroy me.
But the enemy was within.
Wow. They're so good at making gray area and presenting counter argument. You said she was a debate champ. She was so good at presenting a counter argument, even if it was a straw man argument. She was able to be so persuasive. But meanwhile, usually when someone is like her, that is real flirtatious and, philandering, they tend to attack the pure one and project their own behaviors onto that person. At what point did she begin to exhibit a extreme form of jealousy?
Well, we had moved around. We did some missions work, and she didn't really project a lot of things. She seemed like she was supportive of me in a lot of ways, even though I couldn't quite put my finger on why the destruction of everywhere we went. I was a big fish in a small pond within my denomination, and God began to use me, and I was preaching all over the place. But somehow, some way, the more popular I became, it began to put a jealousy inside of her. She began to warn me about women and ministry people that was trying to seduce me. And I did not gather that at all. But, I thought, well, my wife is put there for the purpose of trying to help protect me. So there's maybe some things that I don't see. So the more that my name, became popular and she, was not as popular, if you will, the more I started seeing a flip of her trying to bring me down to the point where, we had moved to another state and starting a church. She started accusing me of having with neighbors and stuff, like having attractions to. Well, I found myself defending myself, and I'm thinking, there's no way in the world that I'm attracted to that individual, and it wouldn't even be people that would be attractive to me. But I found myself defending myself all the time, and I found myself like in this point of where all the time where we would go, she would say that a person was being too flirtatious towards me, and I was returning that flirtatious behavior back to them. And then I began to question myself and thinking, well, that's not in my heart. How am I doing that? Like, how is that even possible?
That's one thing that Jezebel will always do. They will put behaviors upon you that aren't there. And like we already established, something you saw in her from the very beginning was she was overly flirtatious. She didn't have boundaries, and she obviously had, sexual activities with other men, and you were walking in a pure way and being a loyal husband to her, but she had to start riding every little thing that could even, in the tiniest way, appear to be a flirtatiousness in someone else, even if it wasn't. And she was going to nail you to the cross on these very things that she was actually doing all out.
Well, our night of our honeymoon, we got in an argument. I mean, before anything had happened between us, she wanted to know every physical relationship that I was in. Right? I mean, it didn't make sense. We're in the most romantic moment of our time, and the highlight, the peak, the crescendo, to celebrate. And I said, this is not the time to talk about this kind of stuff. And so we actually got in an argument, and she wanted to start sharing things that had happened in her life. And, and then and then sporadically throughout these years, she would want to have these sit down conversations and to discuss physical things that happened between me and other girls. And then she began to start pulling from my past and trying to make me feel guilty, like she's never crossed those lines ever before. And I'm like, well, yeah, you did, because you got pregnant. I mean, how did you get pregnant? How did these things happen? How did you get yourself into these point in times? Well, during that time that I'm talking about, when this other state, she really began to take the things of my past and began to put them into the future and make me feel very guilty for past relationships that I had.
Which is so strange how I think it's a twofold process. She was using those stories to, like you said, apply them to your future, apply them to your MO, your modus operandi for living now that you were married, so that she could pin you to the wall with it. But meanwhile, she was also telling you stories of herself in order to give you a panic about her being the same way. And she was really manipulating your spirit in such a way that you would be in panic mode all the time, whether it's about your own behavior or about her behavior.
Oh, that is correct. I think what people don't understand is at this point in time, she started telling me little bits and pieces of things. Like she told me that when we had gotten engaged that I never knew about, she said that she had a guy living with her, but it was just strictly platonic, that the guy was sleeping on the couch. He was, I knew nothing about this. Okay. And so she starts telling me about this. A couple things happened, but she wasn't sure what happened because the lights were out and she didn't do anything, but he kept trying to do things. And I'm like, what? And so she kept telling me these little things throughout her young life, teenage life, and she kept sprinkling things throughout our marriage to make me like doubt everything that she had told me. That she even told me that she never even dated one time through her high school.
I remember one time with a Jezebel I was with, I would meet people and she would tell me, oh, he was over at my house for a party and we laid in the bed together, but we just laid there. They just give you enough to have this image of this person that you just met that you actually liked. Correct. And thought was great. And suddenly that same person was in bed with her. And and they just say it not so nonchalantly, like, oh, this won't matter to you. It's just information. I just want you to know me better. And it's always stuff that's going to undermine your relationship and get you worried that, gosh, this person was so freewheeling with themselves toward other people, but it never crossed any lines. It never, that would make them seem whorish or anything like that. But after the fact, deep down that much more than what they said happened.
Well, yeah, and she would tell me about, because of all her pageantry and her things, she started off with, she would tell me about all of these girls that did things to her, or women that did things to her, touched her, or tried to get her to engage sexually. And I would watch her watch me, and I was like, my brain couldn't comprehend, because all of a sudden it wouldn't even make sense in the light of when she was telling me and why she was telling me. And it was almost like you couldn't tell if it was a point of enjoyment for her, and that's what was made it so confusing. She wasn't like coming to me and saying that this was, hey, I never told you this before, or that she was concerned about it. She was almost like she would tell me in a way that would make me question everything about her and who she really was.
And it was those demons inside of her just trying to destroy you. They were playing mind games with you. I think sometimes Jezebels do things without a preconceived notion they're going to do it. I think they sometimes do it automatically because of the enemy's game plan and his playbook. He's going to play it out in that person, especially one as possessed as your Jezebel probably was at that time.
Yes. So as time went on, and then there was just so many flags and so many strange things, and she would withhold herself sexually from me for no reason at times. And during this time, I went through a very small period that Satan had come in to my life, and I was working out at this gym in our apartment complex, and had seen some things on the TV that I just walked into, and the television was on. And so it got me kind of going down that road of a little bit into pornography. And so I actually got on the computer. I looked some things up myself. Well, she ended up finding that. I confessed to it. But then here's the turning point. When I came clean with all of that, now it was almost like she had a platform that from the next 13 years to the day, if I were speaking to her right now, this is exactly what she'd bring up, is that little stint that I had some indiscretions at looking at pornography, that there was, it was always the trump card in any argument ever that we would ever have in the course of 13 years, that because I had looked at pornography, that she had a right to divorce me. And so, because I had looked at a woman with lust and committed adultery with her in my heart. And so that was now anything that happened for the next 13 years, and every single interactions with males on her part, it was always brought to that point and that time. I have this on you. I have a right to divorce you, and I chose not to divorce you. And so now that has been a trump card, if you will.
Well, it's ironic that the very thing that she had made herself out to be a seductress, she had seduced many men to lust outside of your marriage, prior to your marriage. That was kind of her modus operandi. Then for her to withhold sexual relations from you, which the scriptures are very clear that you're not to do except to be for prayer or fasting for a time. And the reason why you're not supposed to do that is to prevent your spouse from being tempted to go elsewhere. And so, first of all, her sin was the first one in holding herself back from you, and without reason other than to torment you, basically. Yes, you did admit you did sin. You did look at another woman to lust after her through pornography, but you repented. And then for her, as a demonic accuser of the brethren, to continue to hold that over and to amplify that over you, even after you had confessed and repented, when she had never confessed and repented to anything she had done. She always made excuses. She never admitted to being wrong. It was always some story to cover up her own sin. And so, like you said, she had something on you now, and that was going to be used to the uttermost to keep you down and to try to destroy you.
Right, and that's what I want to warn people from, because I was guilty. I was guilty. I was 100% guilty of that. And what she would do is she would make me buy books, buy videos. She would make me join every single men's thing that was, in my community for sexual addiction. And
so she kept you on that treadmill. You could have just repented, cast the spirit of pornography out, and been done with it. But she kept you on the guilt treadmill, almost like AA or NA would do to a person.
I would learn more about sexuality with these books and with these men's groups than I ever knew.
Right. It actually got you to probably sin more. And I know I keep interrupting you, and I'm going to stop, but I want to say one more thing about her withholding. Did she ever repent for withholding sex from you? Did she ever say, I'm sorry I did that, I'm sorry that I was a catalyst or at least a factor in you turning to pornography?
One thing that you have to know is any apology ever given lacks sincerity. If the apology got her to her end and to what she wanted, then she would apologize, but never apologize for anything.
But did she ever directly address that part of her being part of the equation? I don't think she did, but I'm asking you if she ever did.
The answer to that is no way. Matter of fact, she would laugh and she would mock that verse. I would show her at times that verse. I would show her, and not in a way of controlling her or anything. I just said, if we want to come apart for fasting and praying, but she said, well, I have a right because you're a sexual pervert. And,
wow.
And so she would say these things in front of my children.
Wow.
She would say that I was, and I want to be very careful at what I say, but she would say that I was screwing thousands of women, online. She would say things that were so radically not true, but she would always say it in front of my children. She would say it in front of the counselor. She would make
That was the smear campaign.
Well, then every time I go to preach, every time I go to speak, she would warn to go tell the congregation. She would warn to go ahead of me and to say, do you realize that a sexual pervert is getting ready to tell you the word of God?
Wow.
And so then
what a smear campaign.
Correct. And so I had a wise pastor that I went to, and I would cry and I would break down, and I would cancel appointments. I would cancel all kinds of opportunities to share the gospel, because I'm like, I can't, this is who I am. They said, well, is that what you're doing? Is that who you are? No. And I would say, well, no, this was 7 years ago. And they would laugh, and they would say, do you understand what she's doing to you? Do you understand that she's tearing you down? Do you understand that she's destroying you and your family? And what you need to do from here on out is you need to, go to that pastor right in front of her and say, I think you need to know something, and you need to take that tool away from her. So that's what I started doing. And when I started doing that, then what I would say, hey, I want you to know, 7 years ago, whenever time it was, I want you to know that I had spent a couple months looking at pornography, and my wife, finds that important for you to know. And so every time I would, take away that tool, she would up the thing, and to the point where she would start saying that I would go get my hair cut, and it would be by a woman. She would say that I was having an adulterous affair because I had a woman touching me, and she was going to tell everybody that. And so it wouldn't stop.
They love to openly shame the minister. She wanted you put to an open shame. She even had you shame yourself by, trying to tell people in advance. I mean, the destruction of your ministry that she tried to do when there was nothing there. Yeah, you admitted to looking at porn. You repented 7 years prior, and she was milking that incessantly and making every normal interaction, be it a haircut or, buying a burger from somebody behind the McDonald's. Right. It didn't matter what it was. If you interacted with a woman in a normal way, she was going to amplify it, and that's because the devil always accuses other people of what she herself had been doing, was doing. Did you learn later on? Did you start to discover? She had you so focused on yourself that you couldn't see maybe that she was doing the very thing she was accusing you. But at what point did you discover that, gosh, she's out seducing men left and right?
Well, I would hear things from people, and people would say, it's interesting to me that your wife, good men of God or women of God would say, I find it very interesting that she says these things about you, but there's not one person that would, accuse you of being that way. But the interesting part is she seems very seductive herself. So then that would confuse me, because she would always tell me, this is not seduction. I grew up around guys, and I grew up around, this is what she would tell me, that was her way of interacting, that, she had already made excuse for everything that she did or said or how she interacted with guys, because I would notice she would touch men a lot, like on their arms or their shoulders, or she would compliment them in a way that would make me feel very uncomfortable. And it would also make me feel inferior, almost make me feel jealous. Well, I've never been jealous in my life. And I couldn't figure out why she would want to make me feel jealous everywhere that we would go. Or she would
but probably to her, that was just your insecurity.
Well, that's what
she's accusing you of flirting when there's absolutely nothing going on. And there she is, like, it's in all the men's manuals on dating that, and I haven't read a lot of them. A friend of mine had one. I looked in there, and it's like, if the woman touches your arm, that means something. So everybody knows that. So she's around touching all these men and reaching out to them and flirting at such a level that is beyond the pale, and falsely accusing you at the same time.
Correct. It got me so confused. I kept thinking that I don't even know who I am. I was so concerned about my own spiritual life, because she would say, I can't believe that you can't see that. The devil has you so deceived that you are being so flirtatious with all of these women that I began to believe this, and I began to get scared of myself. Well, it came to a point, Doug, that I ended up having all kinds of health problems, and to the point I went to the Cleveland Clinic, and they diagnosed me with early Alzheimer's, said I had told me I had brain damage. I was on 16 medications at one time. My testosterone had declined to, they said, of a 90-some-year-old man. And
I want to stop you there. That is definitely part of the emasculation process of this spirit. If you're, ladies, I'm not trying to say that there aren't men that are narcissists that don't do the same things or aren't physical reactions to male narcissists. Please don't take this wrongly. We're talking about the female Jezebel here. And when it comes to this situation, that is one of the prime things, is the emasculation of the man, and the testosterone levels drop as if he had been gelded like a horse or fixed like a dog. And that's what they do. They emasculate and they make eunuchs of men. And the Jezebel had eunuchs, and they make eunuchs of their spouses and of men, and they take away their manhood, and they take away their ability to be in the proper pecking order in the family, and have the proper order of things. Christ the head of the man the head of the woman. That's very clear in Ephesians 5, if you'd like to read it. So all of those things that happen, and it's natural that Chris here would have a physical reaction to a spiritual assault.
Yes, and I had a Christian doctor, and he would tell me what was going on. He would tell me that I need to really figure some things out because he said, we're running all these tests on you. I had one of the nation's leading clinic diagnose me with some of these things, and also our state is also a leading in the medical, and they diagnosed me with all these things. But the problem was, as they said, physiologically, we can't see anything going on. We are reading all these numbers, these blood tests, and we cannot figure out what is actually happening to you. And my doctor, who's a Christian, would pray with me often. He said, I know exactly what's going on. And he would tell me that it was, a situation going on with me and my wife.
It was a spiritual assault by a Jezebel spirit.
Correct. And he didn't use that terminology, and I was completely unaware of it. But he said, as we do all of these tests on you, the only way that you're going to break free from all of this is when you are in a healthy situation. I'm just going to tell you right now, you need to break free, whatever that looks like. He never encouraged me to get a divorce, but he did encourage me of breaking free, whatever that meant, from my marriage.
How far along in the marriage were you when this happened?
This was about 9 years into the marriage, because I've been, 13, 14 years of living the horrible side of this, where she started making accusations. Like I said, even to this day, if we were in a conversation with her right now, this is exactly what she would tell you, that she had the right to divorce me back then because I had, committed the sin of adultery at looking at women, with lust in my heart. And so this is the very trump card.
Meanwhile, she had committed adultery on you from the beginning, like literal adultery.
Oh, there's no doubt about it looking back. And everybody kept saying it. Counselors, pastors, everybody said. The interesting part is, Joel, not one person, I was on teaching teams and everything, not one woman. We've interviewed a lot of women just to validate her claims. Not one woman has ever claimed that you have looked at them in a wrongful way, said anything. This was church after church. And one thing that, the listeners, I want you to understand, what we would have to do is, as these things would come to fruition and it seemed like maybe some uncovering of her, we'd end up having to switch churches, because she would either cause something to happen or she would say she didn't feel uncomfortable. So we would go from church to church to the point of, I think we were at a total of 15 different churches in our marriage.
Because once she tried to out you, smear campaign her own husband, who she had once said was going to have a great ministry. That was the love bombing phase. She's smear campaigning and ruining the ability to make a living, to have an income, to build a steady resume in what you were trying to do. I know that sounds like it from the business perspective, but she was foiling you at every turn. And then as soon as the people there would see that she was actually the culprit, and she was the one at wrong and at fault, then she would get on out of there, because the truth, she had to tell lies about you because the truth about her would destroy her. So, and if you had stayed any longer, those churches would have been able to undergird you and support you enough that you could have gotten away from her sooner. And she didn't have that.
Yes, that is correct. And until it came to the final point, the last church that I am a part of now, they seen things right away. She had joined that church ahead of me because we were separated for a time of about 6 months. And she joined that church before I did. She told them that I, had done all these things to her, that I raped her on a regular basis, that I...
It was the rape lie again.
Yes. Matter of fact, she went to the church main people and said, but here's the thing, I believe in being married for life, and so I want to be married to this guy. Everything that they told her, they encouraged her to get out of the marriage because of the monster that she had painted me to be. So when I eventually came into the church, they said, one of the elders pulled me aside and said, I don't know what's happening here, but I want to let you know that your wife painted a picture of you, and I'm not seeing any of that. I just want you to know that. When you first came here, the first 3 Sundays, we sat around you unbeknownst to you because we thought we might have to defend your wife. Like, we thought you were physically going to hurt her. Within 2 months of you being here and getting to know you, we thought, man, we would love to have this guy on our team here and be a part of the leadership team. Wow. And so we started seeing things that was completely contrary to her whole story. So things began to unravel and unwind. And I'm going to tell you something. If it wasn't for this church's discretion among all those people that took the initiative to said, no, your wife has a lying spirit. She has a religious spirit. We believe that she's a troubled person. They came to me individually. I didn't go and counsel with them. I didn't tell any of my side of the story. They began to see all of these things out in the open.
Praise God. He brought that which was done in the darkness out into the light.
Amen. And if it wasn't brief for these guys, so they began to talk amongst each other. They spoke to each other, and they came to me and told me that 14 guys came forward and said that your wife hit on them. I mean, sexually hit on them. Wow. And so that's when everything started unfolding. And then
she was literally a sex addict. She
Correct.
Couldn't even like in the first month you were married to her, she's down there flirting. And I'm not trying to delve too deeply into what was going on and try to keep this G-rated, but you're just married. I'm sure you guys were plenty enough active to satisfy a normal person, and yet she's out there at the pool flirting and having men come into your apartment. So it just shows that many Jezebels can either be completely cold to sex at all, or they're just so over ramped up on sexual activities that they'll just sleep with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of people over the course of their lives.
And that's correct. And at that time when we started seeing some of these things, this past year I'm talking about in 2017 in January, our marriage was such at shambles that this church was trying to help us out and trying to counsel. And they were already seeing some of these things that she wanted to get remarried. So in January of 2017, we had a remarriage. And I want everybody to realize what, one day I will post what a narcissistic Jezebel marriage looks like, because in that marriage, I didn't even realize it. I was against the whole thing. She forced me into spending thousands of dollars in this remarriage, recommitment type ceremony. And she could,
to the man that she had reported had multiple times raped her.
Correct.
I'm going to remarry you.
Now,
please.
What I would want everybody to see, which it took my sister and my brother-in-law to point out, was in that ceremony, I only made vows to her. She did not make one vow or promise to me in the whole ceremony.
Wow. Interesting.
And I was completely unaware of that because I felt, I want to do my part. And so I was so focused on my recommitment to my marriage, that my brother-in-law said and confronted her and said, that marriage was beautiful and it was wonderful. The only problem is you made no promise nor commitment to him. Well, that started, a rift that we were no longer allowed to talk to my sister and my brother-in-law.
She had to isolate.
Once again. Correct. And at this point, she'd isolated me from my parents, from my sisters, from any friends that I ever had. What people don't understand is I now was only allowed really to have conversation with her. I was not allowed to talk to anybody about our marriage. I was not allowed to privately speak to anyone.
Meanwhile, she was smearing you all over town and your industry and your work. Ladies and gentlemen, this story is outrageous, and I know you want to hear the end of it. But we're concluding part 2 of this interview with Chris, his pseudonym, and we are going to continue this in part 3. Remember that the music you're listening to, you can download for free at reverbnation.com/without spot or blemish ministry music. You can visit our blog at withoutspotterblemish.blogspot.com. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at the link below or paypal.com. Our handle is withoutspot@gmail.com, which is also our email. Please email us with your praise reports and prayer requests. Thanks for listening to this second episode, and join us for the third.
But tiny hope, it grew so large, the tree the ground did smoke. Tiny faith, a tree of life, to something I doubt couldn't break. When will it take? 'Cause hope has no clue when your life runs out on you. It goes on believing, fights the good fight, and it keeps you praying all through the night. 'Cause tiny hope, it grew so large, the tree the ground did smoke. Tiny faith, a tree of life, something I doubt couldn't shake. When will it take? Time would soon tell that this tree could not be felled. Life without a faith falls apart, but still it's not too late to find the blessing that remains. The hope abandoned can be reclaimed.